Good morning and welcome to the Talk of the Town. My guest today is Rehana Thowfeek, economist, research consultant at the Advocata Institute. Good morning, Rehana.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Rehana, when we talk about state-owned enterprises, they're an important element of an economy. And SOEs are ultimately owned by the general public, and the government agencies that exercise the ownership rights are answerable to the general public. However, we constantly hear about debt-ridden SOEs, chronically loss-making SOEs. Give us an overview of how we can reduce corruption vulnerabilities in the management of SOEs.
Sure. So the main thing, as you mentioned, we are the owners of state-owned enterprises, and the managers of the SOEs and the politicians are accountable to us. Theoretically, yes, but in practice, I don't know whether you agree with it, but I certainly don't agree that in practice that they are accountable to us. There have been a myriad of cases which are very popular on the news where presidents and prime ministers have appointed their siblings, cousins, etc. to boards which those people are not even qualified to be on, and they have abused their power. They have misused the resources of the state-owned enterprise. So although in theory, yes, they are accountable to us, in practice they are not. So how do we bring this into practice? We need to obviously go back and we need to look at the corporate governance mechanisms and the structures that are in place, and then you need to address the deficiencies and bring in new rules and regulations which the SOEs are bound to comply with. And part of this is also the whole process with privatization. When you privatize, you bring in private sector competitors, so there is that market element which helps to hold some of the SOEs accountable. And then you have, if you, for example, you divest and you sell shares on the stock exchange, you're automatically, forcing the state-owned enterprises to comply with financial disclosure rules. So these are all part of making the state-owned enterprises more efficient.
Right. There is a common misconception in society that there are only two options. Either you nationalize an industry or you privatize it. But beyond this binary, there is a whole spectrum of options when we talk about SOE reforms. Take us through that.
Sure. So even if we consider privatization, there are many ways to do that. And it can be divesting a part of the shares of the state-owned enterprise, selling it on the stock exchange. It can be selling it to a strategic investor, or you can sell it to other investors, foreign investors. You can sometimes you don't even have to sell the SOE, but you allow private sector competitors to come and set up, and you create competition in the market. So that is also part of privatization. Then if you look at the energy sector, earlier we had subsidized pricing, but now we are following a more cost-reflective pricing strategy, and there's a fuel formula in place. So all of these are also SOE reforms, which are going to contribute to alleviating both the financial burden as well as instituting better corporate governance on these state-owned enterprises.
Another issue that is floating around, which needs clarity, is why are profit-making SOEs being privatized?
Sure. So that is one of the main facts that are always stated, main argument that's stated against privatization. But if you look at most of the large SOEs like the Sri Lankan Airlines, CPETCO, CEB, these are the big fish, right? They don't turn a profit. There are very few profit-making SOEs to begin with. And then some of the profit-making SOEs are only profitable because of their monopoly status, which is protected by the state. and then also we have to consider the fact that profitability alone is not sufficient to indicate whether the government should privatize or not.
Right.
Because you have to look at other indicators such as return on assets. So basically your, with the assets that you have, how are you, what is the output from this? So if we, if we take Sri Lanka Telecom, which is one of the examples which are always mentioned when you're talking about profit making SOEs, but if you compare it to say local competitors, other local competitors and regional competitors on a return on assets indicator, they don't perform as well as the local competitors or the regional competitors. And then finally you have to accept the fact that the government has a major fiscal problem. So, I mean, do you see investors lining up to buy loss-making SOEs? You don't, right? And especially with not the ones which are, heavily debt-laden. So, you have to offer up some of these private profit-making entities, and you have to, do it sort of as a goodwill to show the investors that you are serious about this reform agenda. Right. It can help to reduce the conflict of interest that usually happens in these in the government aspects. And then the most important part, and this is a big failing that is not discussed a lot, is that when you're privatizing a state-owned monopoly, you have to be careful not to create private monopolies. So to do that, you need to have a very strong competition law and a very strong competition authority. Unfortunately, we don't have a strong competition authority in Sri Lanka, which is the Consumer Affairs Authority, but it needs to be revamped. It needs to be, the mandate of competition needs to be granted to the agency, to the authority, and there are lots of deficiencies that need to be addressed. Unfortunately, without a strong competition regime, and we may not see the positive impacts of privatization, and we may see some instances where there is a negative impact.
All right. Thank you very much, Rehana Thowfeek, for joining us on the Talk of the Town. It's back to the studio.